Good morning, everyone. Pastor Johnson coming to you live today. I am Associate Pastor here at Zion, also serving at Bethany Lutheran Church in Easton. And we are gathered together for our Word at the middle of the week. We weekly have our Bible study on Wednesdays, where we dive into the text and seek to harvest out some of the treasures that are available here in God's Word. And we have been walking through the book of Exodus for quite some time. We are, in a sense, kind of at the halfway point after chapter 20. And right now we're in the thick of laws being given to Israel. And these laws given to Moses from God, not only the Ten Commandments, but a lot of the other laws that we've been talking about for the past couple weeks, and we'll hear more today, laws concerning social justice and how to treat the downtrodden and so on and so forth. All these are meant to have Israel be that people that God says that they are to be a holy people, a kingdom of priests, that they are going into a land that he is giving them. And in the land that he is giving them, there's going to be all sorts of people who believe all sorts of things and have all sorts of visions of morality. And Israel is to be different. They're to be set apart. That's what it means to be holy. They're to be set apart, different, distinct. That there's going to be something that looks and sounds and smells different, as it were, for the people of Israel. And so all these laws, both the moral law that we see, that the core of all the laws in Exodus chapter 20, and a lot of these other laws too that are more civil in nature, chapters 21, 22, and 23, are meant again to lead and guide Israel to be different from the nations around them. And so we talked about last week some of those laws of restitution, how it is someone is to be recompensated if they've lost something. And so this is about being fair. Again, this is about making the most of living in a fallen world, of having the most just society, living in the midst of sinful people who do sinful things. And these laws are meant to, again, harbor a sense of peace in the society, in the nation of Israel, and also to care for those who are really losing out. And so God always has an eye on those who are down and out, those who are destitute, and we'll see a little bit of that going on in our next section as we look today. I'm going to try to get through Exodus chapter 22, starting at verse 16, and I'm looking at getting through chapter 23, verse 9. So we'll see how far we get, because the next section is about laws concerning the festivals, and that's kind of a different tone than what we hear today, which is more civic in nature. And so these are laws that we read in the books that police officers enforce today. Some of them they still enforce today, some of them not so much. But again, these laws are meant to have Israel be different, that they're to be set apart, holy, and this is what their life lived out in this sinful world is to look like. And so, without further ado, with that extended introduction, we'll take a look at these various laws concerning justice in the social sphere of life, beginning at verse 16. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. Verses 16 and 17. And this law, as you might imagine, is a law that is tied to the sixth commandment, you shall not commit adultery. And so this law is a further expression of that, in which a man who seduces a young woman, that is to say has sex with her, that if that happens, he is legally, not only morally, but also legally obligated to take her as his wife. And so in other words, sex isn't cheap, right? If you are going to do the deed, then you are going to if you're going to invest yourself physically in someone, you're also going to invest yourself financially in them. And so you are going to take this woman to be your wife if you have seduced her. And so it isn't quite clear if this is getting at rape. I don't think it is. It's talking about seducing someone, a man seducing a young lady, a virgin. And so I'm not quite sure if it's getting at rape, but but if it is, you know, I don't think it is. But what I think it is getting at is just this issue of, if you're going to do the deed, then there are obligations to that, because of course when you do the deed, the natural progression of things is, after intercourse there is conception, that there is a child. And so again, this goes back not only to the sixth commandment, you shall not commit adultery, but this ultimately goes back to the orders of creation, where God creates man and woman that they may become one flesh. And to become one flesh, you become one flesh in the act of sex. And so to be united in that, as one flesh in the act of sex, is in a sense to really marry someone. That's why in the church we make it a big deal to say, you know what, you shouldn't be having random sexual encounters with people, because these are not people you are going to marry. Because to invest yourself physically, emotionally, psychologically in someone is to say that you want to marry them. And so why would you do something that is just going to come back and haunt you for the rest of your life? And so again, this law concerning seducing a young woman, it's meant to guard the young woman most of all. Here is this man who's doing what he shouldn't be doing, but nevertheless, it has been done. And so if he's going to have this woman as his own physically, he's also going to have her as his own as a wife. And so again, this is caring for the woman, and also showing to the men that what you do with your members matters. It matters because if you're going to invest yourself in this person, you're going to take care of them financially as well. There is an outlet in this in verse 17, where if the father does not like this man, hates this man, despises this man, and does not want this man to marry his daughter, the father is free to just simply dismiss him, and this guy who had done the deed with his daughter shall pay over a substantial amount of money, the bride price, for his wife. And so again, the man who did the deed is going to cost him a lot, and the woman shall be paid for, and so there'll be compensation. So again, this is guarding the act of sexual intimacy, and ultimately guarding the estate of marriage. That's why this law is in place. Our next law, verse 18, very short. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Now, we don't have laws like that nowadays, where if someone practices a false faith that they are doomed to die. We don't have laws like that. Some nations across the world, namely Muslim nations, do have laws like this. They are called anti-conversion laws. That is to say, if you are a Muslim and you convert to Christianity, or you convert to Judaism, or anything else that's not Islam, you can be sentenced to die. And so some Muslim nations have this, not all of them, so I don't want to paint that in too broad of a brush. But in this context, in verse 18, what Moses is getting at here, what the Lord is getting at through Moses, is this issue of sorcery ultimately will lead people astray. Because sorcery, sometimes called witchcraft, magic, the manipulation of the elements, tries to get around the revealed will of God, where people think that they can become masters of their own destiny. And so tied to witchcraft, sorcery, not only is idolatry, but also there's a whole laundry list of other things tied to it. In the ancient world, often sexual immorality was tied with sorcery and witchcraft. Human sacrifice was often tied to sorcery and witchcraft. And so this law against a sorceress, a witch, as it were, to die for their actions, is meant to preserve the most life in the nation. And so God takes seriously the faith of the people, and he wants the people to take seriously their faith as well, and to not tolerate these deviant forms of pseudo-religion. And again, we don't persecute people for whatever they believe nowadays, provided that what they believe doesn't harm people. But sorcery, witchcraft, back in the day, and still today, seeks to harm people. So again, a really clear prescription against sorcery, against what we call also witchcraft, which used to be in the small catechism. It kind of fell out of the small catechism, but then that language was brought back into recent small catechisms, because within the last 30 years, people especially young women, have begun practicing witchcraft again. So it still is a thing. Those things never really go away. They are still there. And Hollywood really popularizes some of that as well. Our next law, again, a law concerning sexuality, verse 19, whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. Pretty clear. You shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff with animals anyways. And so for the one who does do that with an animal, they're going to die. These bestiality laws are still in the books in many nations, and in our nation, people aren't put to death, but they are arrested for them because it is illegal. It's really abuse and cruelty towards animals, but it also speaks of a really disturbed mind and conscience that wants to, mainly this is going to be an issue with men, not so much with women, that a man would do this with a sheep or with a goat or whatever. And again, this is just, again, to protect the animal, but also to protect the society from that deviancy, which is just so weird and bizarre. And so this is still with us. Bestiality in some shape or form, or, really throughout the world, it's still there. But again, just really bizarre. It's really, quite disgusting when you think about it, that someone would want to do that with an animal, with a dog, with a sheep, with a cow, whatever. And so a terrible crime deserves a terrible punishment. And so that's why this law is in there. And it's kind of sad that the Lord would have to give this law, but that speaks to the existence that possibly people in ancient Israel were engaging in this sort of behavior. And again, tied to this too is also pagan practice, because a number of pagan religions, the ancient Canaanites and Babylonians and Assyrians, and even in some of the Greek and Roman myths, you do hear stories of bestiality, of this person mating this person, this animal, or like Zeus takes the form of a bull and whisks away Europa from her family, and they come together and have a child, or the Minotaur that we hear about in Greek myth, what was born of a bull and a woman. And so those stories, this prescription against bestiality is tied to that actual physical act, but also underneath that is some of that pagan mythology and sometimes pagan practice where pagan priests and priestesses would engage in this sort of behavior. And so as a part of their religious life, a part of their faith. And Israel is to have no part of that whatsoever. Verse 20, whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. That verse is tied to those other verses as well, because if you are permitting sorcery, if you are permitting bestiality, then that means you are permitting sacrifices to other gods, and that just can't be permitted. Again, Israel is to be a holy people, they are to be a pure people, and they are to clear out any cancer in their society as quickly as possible. Verse 21 through 24. You shall not wrong the sojourner or oppress them, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them, and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. And verses 25 to 27, if you lend money to any of my people who is poor, you shall not be like the moneylender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him. If ever you take your neighbor's cloak and pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering. And it is his cloak for his body, and what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. So those two laws concerning sojourners, or what we might call immigrants in the land, and this issue of lending money and not charging interest in verses 25 through 27 are again meant to really uplift those who are the outsider, whether it is the sojourner, the wanderer. And in ancient societies, sojourners were quite common. People were traveling all over the world, especially in this area, what we call the Levant, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, that area of the world. The Eastern Mediterranean world was just a huge confluence of roads coming from Asia and India, up from Africa, down from from modern day Turkey and Europe. And so a whole lot of people were traveling through this area. And so hospitality was expected, that these people were to be treated with great care and respect, because they are also bearers of the image of God. And so these sojourners might be believers, but they also very well might be unbelievers. And so still the call to treat the sojourner, the immigrant, so to speak, the one who is visiting the country, just passing through, is to be treated with dignity and with respect. And so again, it targets a group of people who would be easy to write off and shun. And God says, no, you're not going to do that, because you were that way before. Remember, you were sojourners in Egypt. You didn't belong there, but nevertheless, I took care of you. These people traveling in our country, they might not belong here, but you will still care for them because I cared for you, and so you will care for them. And so that's tied to the character of God. And the next section about lending money and not charging interest was a very important one, because if you're lending money to someone who is poor and they cannot pay you back, why in the world would you charge interest? That just says you want to make even more out of this, that you're really not there to help them. Pardon the siren that's passing by here. You're not really helping this person. You're giving them a few dollars here and there, but ultimately you're trying to get something out of it. And so this really is fulfilled in the work and person of Jesus, where Jesus says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Just give it away. Give and don't expect anything in return. And so again, that is kind of the flowering of some of these commandments, as we see Jesus treat people with great mercy, with great kindness, and with great respect. And this is all, again, grounded in the God who is compassionate. As we hear in verse 27, I will hear, I am compassionate. Another siren. A busy morning here in Wausau. Thanks be to God for police officers and EMT workers and nurses and doctors who care for people in all hours of the day. Next couple of laws here, verses 28 through 31 rather, to close out chapter 22. You shall not revile God nor curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses the firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with its mother, and on the 8th day you shall give it to me. You shall be consecrated to me. Therefore, you shall not eat any flesh that is torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. These laws, in verse 28, you shall not revile God nor curse a ruler. That is tied back to the fourth commandment, honor your father and mother. And so this is to honor those in positions of authority. This is what we teach our confirmation students. And because to revile someone in a position of authority is, as we hear, connected to reviling God, because to revile one person in authority is really to revile all those who have been given authority, and the one who gives authority is God. And so we want to respect those in positions of authority, provided that these people in positions of authority are not transgressing the revealed will of God. And so if they are wantonly killing people, then those leaders need to be resisted, because they are harming life, they're not harboring life. And so that's the job of a ruler, and the job of the people is to bless the ruler, to pray for them, to honor the emperor, as St. Peter says. In verses 29 through 30, we hear the importance of giving back to God what he has given to us. And so this will come more into focus when we hear about tithing later on. In verse 31, we hear again the importance of being different, of being consecrated to the Lord. And therefore that shapes how we eat. We're not supposed to eat carrion, any flesh that is torn by beasts in the field. We're not scavengers, because God will provide all that we need. And so we don't need to go out scavenging for dead carcasses and things like that. Just leave that for the animals. But God will take care of you. And so this might allude to some other practices too, some pagan practices of finding carrion, finding decomposing animals, and using it for not very good purposes, including eating, which you could get very sick from. And so a good law, don't eat roadkill, in other words. That's kind of pointing out the obvious, but just don't do it. Don't eat roadkill. Leave the deer, leave the raccoons, the opossums, leave those things on the side of the road. You don't just leave them for the coyotes, right? Leave them there for them. Chapter 23, we continue to hear a few more laws, and I'll just read this whole block of laws, verses 1 through 9. You shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not fall in with many to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit, siding with the many so as to pervert justice, nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of the one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue him. You shall rescue it with him. You shall not pervert the justice due to the poor in his lawsuit. Keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent and the righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked. And you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of those who are in the right. You shall not oppress a sojourner. You know the heart of a sojourner, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, some of these commandments here are tied to the 7th and 8th commandments in regards to stealing and bearing false witness. And so we hear some of that legal language, spreading a false report, bearing false witness, perverting justice. And so in the courtroom, things are to be full of truth, because if there is no truth in the courtroom, if there is no truth being exhibited by people who are in conflict, that's not going to help anybody. And so this is, again, about not bearing false witness, but defending our neighbor's actions in the kindest possible way. It's about treating people fairly, is what it is. You give everyone a fair shake. And that's how many of our laws in American society, all of our laws in American society are structured, is to create parity, to create fairness. You are guilty, you're innocent until proven guilty, right? There's a reason for that, so that there is a fair trial. And that's what we get at here in chapter 23, of having a fair trial. And so people aren't treated in any different way, whether they have a lot or even if they have a little. So that little addition in there in verse 3, that you shall not be partial to the poor, says that just because someone is poor, if they have committed a crime, that does not necessarily mean you feel sorry for them and let them off the hook because because they're poor, because that's a perversion of justice as well. They still need to go through the legal process to defend their cause or to be persecuted for what they have done. And then in verses 6 through 8, we see some of that legal language as well, particularly in regards to bribery. Don't bribe judges, don't bribe lawyers, don't bribe people in your workplace, don't bribe your pastors, right? Bribery is not a good thing because then people aren't being honest. You're not being honest with yourself if you have to bribe someone. Don't bribe the president of your child's football association or baseball or hockey association so that your child can become be a part of the traveling team. Don't bribe, because bribery is total dishonesty, and God is a God of truth. God is a God of peace and order, and bribery just messes things up. And so these are what we might call white collar crimes that we don't always see, but are certainly going on in the background, and God is trying to nip all that in the bud. That bribery in any sense of the term is forbidden because, again, it does not create any fairness. In fact, it does the exact opposite. It creates all sorts of unfairness, and unfairness does not make a society peaceful, whole, and orderly. And so God is, again, trying to nip all these things in the bud. The other two commandments in verse 9 and then in verse 4 and 5 are, again, about treating someone fairly. Right? If they've fallen off and they're lying there and their donkey or ox is laying on, just help them. This is just kind of common sense stuff. But also, especially if they're enemy, you might be tempted to say, well, they deserve to suffer. And so God says, no, this is not how you're going to operate as a person of faith. You will help this person. And as Jesus will tell us later, you will even love your enemy. Love your enemy, you'll pray for your enemy, and so you will help even someone who you might consider your enemy. And so again, here are the seeds of that gospel way of life and thinking being sown way back in the ancient history of Israel. And verse 9 just rehearses and rehashes something we heard earlier in chapter 22 about caring for the sojourner, for the one who is traveling, because you were a wanderer, a traveler, and so you care for those who are wandering and traveling too. So lots of important laws, again, meant to guard and preserve ancient Israelite society, things that we can learn from and things that we have learned from in the American context. A lot of our laws are based on some of these very things, where we seek to guard the marriage bedroom. We seek to guard life, human life. We also seek to guard animal life. We seek to guard those who are poor and those who are destitute, those who are wandering, those who are the immigrant, the sojourner, seeking to prevent untrustworthy people infiltrating the legal system. And so a lot of things, again, meant to guard and preserve society as being fair, just, and equitable. And to do it in such a way that the other nations of the world will see and say, wow, we need to do this as well. Because again, Israel, they were to be a light unto the nations, and that the people of the world would see what Israel is doing and want to do that as well. So some more can be said there, but we'll hold off there. Going law by law here in Exodus chapters 22 and 23. Again, this is one of those more difficult sections to get through, so thank you for hanging in there. We'll talk more about some laws next week, and then we'll get back into some more narrative storytelling in the book of Exodus in the weeks to come. So have a blessed week, everybody, and thanks for joining me here now for Bible study. May the Word of God continue to dwell in your hearts richly as you enjoy His Word in both Testaments, Old and New. Take care.